You know, one of the things I love best about my job is getting a chance to see new, great technology that's very practical for you, and I get a chance to share this with you. One that I got a chance to see just recently was an interview with the CEO of a company that deals with smart contracts. This is one of the hottest topics in cryptocurrencies. We hear a lot about Bitcoin, Dash, and other coins that are really good, but this goes even beyond that with business applications for industry, for transportation, for finance, and more. And in this interview, get your notes ready to go, your pencil and paper or your note-taking device of choice, whatever you want, and get ready to take some notes on this as I talk with a man who knows what he's talking about and gives us some great examples. He's the CEO of smartcontract.com, and his name, Sergey Nazarov. We hear a lot of talk today about cryptocurrencies. You hear about Bitcoin. There's some excitement going on there. But an area that intrigues many people, I've seen it and really fascinated with it, I think there's a lot of application, is with smart contracts. Putting together contracts that are a whole lot better than trusting third parties, and there's a lot of benefits in that for business. Well, today you are in luck because I have joining me a person who knows about that. His name is Sergey Nazarov, and he's the CEO of smartcontract.com. Sergey, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Terry. It's good to be here.
Well, I've been looking at what you're doing, what your company is doing, and really exciting to see the kinds of opportunities and the kinds of possibilities. Tell us what is going on, what a smart contract is, and from a 40,000-foot point of view, how people can use that in business.
Sure. So a smart contract is a digital agreement that's been made tamper-proof by being run on decentralized infrastructure. So what that means is that in comparison to traditional digital agreements, computable contracts that are run on centralized systems that do things like ad network payments or do automated payments from insurance companies or automated payments for financial services like securities, all of the systems you have today that are computable contracts are run in a way that if one of the parties wasn't happy with the outcome of the contract as written, they could stop it, right? They could pick up the phone and they could call the entity or the software company that was providing the computable contract, and they could say, I don't like the outcome. I don't want to pay the person even though they performed their obligations to me, right? And that dimension of kind of what you can do with a computable contract has always been lacking. The difference with a smart contract is that it will be executed as written because it's run on a network of computers that none of the parties control, right? So basically, if you do a smart contract and it goes into the network of computers, right, which the blockchain infrastructure is a key part of, then that network of computers will execute your payment if you perform your consideration, right? If you perform what you were supposed to do, you will be paid basically in a deterministic, so you're definitely going to be paid if you perform, and you're definitely not going to be paid if you don't perform. And this level of kind of determinism, this level of trust in the contract executing as written is the additional unique quality of smart contracts. And they're particularly useful in situations where sometimes people want to do some mind changing, right? Like they decide, I know I owe you $1 million on the insurance policy, but I don't really want to pay you. So I'm going to put you through a process that costs $500,000. And instead, I hope you just settle with me for $500,000. And that's not a process that a smart contract will allow, right? A smart contract would look at an indicator, and then it would decide whether the person was supposed to be paid, and then it would pay them. And the other party couldn't really do much about it other than ask the other person to revise the contract. But that's an entirely different conversation than stopping the contract, even though somebody has performed.
Yeah, I like that. It sounds like, Sergey, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've set up a contract that is now monitored not by a trusted third party, we've hired this person, we're paying them so much money to oversee this. Rather, it's now with mathematics. It's with a computer system that's watching what happens. And if I say, hey, I'm going to clean your windows, and I'll do it on the 15th of every month, if some month comes by and I haven't done it on the 15th, we would have a contract that is in there that said, wait a minute, Terry's not going to get a payment this month. We'll be able to have computers control it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's essentially correct, but there's a few nuances to look at even in the statement that you made. So the window cleaning example is a very subjective, qualitative example. And in our experience, smart contracts are good when you can have a complete contract that's entirely resolved by some type of data, right? So it's going to be very difficult to make a contract that's completely resolved based on, did you paint the house the right color blue, right? There's no data that can conclusively prove that to all of the parties involved.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the limitations is that you need, you'll only really find this particularly useful for contracts where you can have conclusive outcomes proven by data. And then the question is, what is that data and how does the contract work with that?
Yeah, that makes sense. And so what it's doing, you've talked about before, it mimics what's happening in the real world so that I can then take the information, put it in some way. Your software, the technology that you have, takes it and gives it into an output that we decide. Tell us a little bit more about the way that works with what you have.
Right. So the nuance of what we're doing is that the contract that we just talked about, this tamper-proof, highly secure form of digital agreement that will execute as written, no matter what anybody tries to stop it from doing, it is not able to talk to data, right? So these smart contracts, they run in blockchain infrastructure. And the way that blockchain infrastructure secures its data using consensus, using agreement among all the networks, makes it so that the contract in these networks can't talk to data feeds on its own, right? So this is the reason why all these contracts today are focused on tokens. It's because tokens is kind of the basic initial out-of-the-box functionality that most smart contract networks have. And in order to do the mimicking that you described of mimicking real-world financial agreements, the contracts would need input from the real world, right? They would need input about price changes, the location of goods being shipped, whether an insurance event occurred, like whether the magnetic lock was locked at a certain time. And all of these inputs, they need to be given to the contract in a secure way that allows it to remain tamper-proof, right? This kind of injection and providing data to the contract is what our technology really excels at. So it excels at taking a real-world event from a data feed and giving it to a smart contract on any number of networks that would then process that event into a contractual outcome, and then the contract would want to probably pay in any number of currencies, and it would also need to generate an output, and that output would also go through the technology we've made and would be able to be done on bank systems or any kind of payment system.
Yeah, I like that. In other words, you've designed it so people can put in the input in the form they want, the agreements, and I like the way you said there's going to be a number of specifics that are related to data, that this was done for shipping. We can see some real benefits on that it was delivered by this, and we see these particular items there. All that's put in there up front, and then it is handled and delivered in an output in the way that people prefer. Matter of fact, one of the ways that you described that, I'm going to share my screen here and go to your website so we can take a look at what's there. We're on your website here, and what we want to do is to take a look at what you've got here. As we look at you say we're solving the connectivity problem, a key limiting factor for smart contract adoption. The way you have that there, can you see that on your screen as well?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, can you give us kind of a real short capsule of what that means and what this chart is telling us? I like the way it sums it up.
Yes, so in the middle, so this site is talking about our Chainlink network product that seeks to solve the connectivity problem defined here. And the connectivity problem is one where all these networks in the middle that you see, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Hyperledger, any number of other smart contract networks that would actually hold the contract, they cannot talk to these data feeds, and they cannot talk to these payment systems. And so this greatly limits what they're able to do, right? It's very difficult for me to imagine a contract that doesn't require external inputs and that doesn't require payment outputs, right? The only contracts I can come up with are contracts that move around tokens, which is why most of the networks here currently focus on that. But our thesis is basically that once you're able to solve this problem and once you're able to get the networks the data they need, then the contracts in those networks can be written relative to external events. And they can also send out payment in whatever format you want. So yeah.
Yeah, so like we see up here, the payment here is like we've got Visa, PayPal, et cetera. The retail payments are coming in there. And we see like here from SWIFT, the banking system that's used around the world by banks like you have here, HSBC or Chase, well-known banks. And we see that we're able to connect everyone because of the magic that you have here. I also like the way you talk about it here, that Chainlink, which is your product, connects smart contracts to any or all external systems and APIs. What in the world is an API?
So an API is an application programming interface. It's just a way that kind of websites and web services and backend and services that kind of the websites we use every day, that's how they talk to each other. So if one website needs to talk to another website, it'll do it through an API. If a smart contract wants to talk to a data provider, they'll do it through the application programming interface, because that's just a natural interface through which computers talk to other systems. And it's become kind of the standard for how developers build payment systems or data feeds into their products. In like Uber and all these different products, a lot of them rely on APIs to get data in and to make things happen outside their system. And so what we're doing is we have a blockchain middleware product called Chainlink and the Chainlink network, which basically allows people to take all this API infrastructure that already exists and to make it usable by the contracts on these new networks, right? Mm-hmm. So we're basically trying to connect the old world, not the old worlds, but the existing API infrastructure where all the data and payments and e-signature and all the other core services are today. And we're trying to make it immediately usable by the smart contracts on these new networks, because they will greatly benefit from being able to do more with these services, right?
Yeah. I can see a lot of benefits on that in different areas, but I'd like to go even deeper, and maybe if you could give us an example. I know it's being used a lot in the financial services area. Give us an example of how that would be used in the real world and how your product Chainlink would be able to work with a smart contract in designing that.
Sure. So if we had a trade finance contract where people were paying for the shipment of goods, we would perhaps want to know where the goods are. If they were frozen goods, we would want to know that the temperature inside the container remained below freezing while they were in shipment. We would want to know when they arrived at the port of receipt. We would want to know when they cleared customs, right? And all of these metrics of contractual completion can be given to the contract in the form of a data feed, right? So you would write a contract that says, I'm going to pay you incrementally as you perform. I know the goods have arrived. I'm going to pay you this much, and I'm going to pay you based on a data feed telling me the goods have arrived, and the data feed telling me that the goods are in the right condition, and then the data feed telling me that the Customs Border Protection Bureau has released them, right? And that's kind of one very simple example.
Yeah, I like that. Sergey, that makes a whole lot of sense, because being a novice myself in this area, I can see someone's manufacturing some goods in, let's pick a country, say Vietnam, and it's going to go by ship to a port in San Francisco, and then we want to get the goods ultimately to the store, or somebody can buy them in New York City. Well, there's a lot of steps along the way, and the way that you describe it makes a lot of sense. Now we've got all these checklists that have to be done. Right now it's been done with paper, and it's been done with a very tedious way and a lot of cost. Seemed like there'd be a lot of benefits, not only saving a cost, but also faster operation. It seems good all the way around using the smart contract. Would that be the case?
Yeah, so using smart contracts creates a lot of efficiency. What you're basically doing is you're front loading a lot of work in terms of defining what should happen around a data feed. And the requirement for that is that there is a data feed. But luckily, there's many more data feeds that can prove performance appearing, right? Like everything is now giving off data. There's IoT devices, there's there's more and more data about what's going on in the real world. And the goal would be to have a data feed that the participants in the contract feel is representative and accurate in terms of actual performance, right? And they would feel comfortable enough with it being representative of that performance that they would be able to attach payment to that outcome according to that data feed. And once you're able to do that, you acquire two very interesting properties, right? The first property is self-verification. So the self-verification of the contract against the data. And then if you also have a way to pay, or you have the confidence to attach payment to the self-verification, you can also now have the property of self-execution. So it creates a lot of efficiency as long as you have the data to do self-verification, and as long as you're comfortable enough to enable self-execution.
Yeah, I like that. I'm getting both of those sides are going to be very important to increase the efficiency. Well, then let me ask you right now, I want you to reach down under the desk there and get out your crystal ball and rub it really well and tell us, how do you see this changing big industries? And very equally important, how long do you see before this is the accepted and normal way of processing contracts?
Sure. So in my experience, I've taken many different approaches to attacking this. And initially I thought that the most inefficient industries would be the ones to go after this first. But the reality is that there are two key metrics for adoption that I've kind of come across in my experience. One metric is that you need few participants, right? So you're trying to get a new contractual arrangement in place. And the easiest place to do that is where you have very few participants, right? So the less participants in the contract, the less people you have to convince to use this new system, right? That's the first dimension. Mm-hmm. The second dimension is that the participants you're trying to convince to use this version of digital agreement already use some version of digital agreement, right? So basically, if you have people that already use computable contracts or already use digital agreement, you're just saying to them, start using a better form of digital agreement. Here's how it's better.
They're already in the game, so they know what it is. It's a less of an education process and uphill battle, right?
Right. So those two dimensions are the dimensions on which I would think about evaluating adoption. And in my experience, in my view, on those two dimensions, if you look at kind of where those two dimensions are most prevalent, so remittances, right? Remittances is commonly a 2 or 3 party transaction where you're sending money internationally, and it's commonly done in digital form much of the time. So that's a place where people already use many cryptocurrencies on the back end, right? On the back office processing. The next one would be something like derivatives, right? Derivatives are securities commonly done between maybe 2 hedge funds, 2 banks, an asset manager, usually 2 parties or maybe 3 parties, including somebody in the middle who manages it. Then you have other types of securities where there's still very few participants. And in the securities industry, you commonly have digital agreements already in use, right? So it's relatively easy to go to people in financial services, in the institutional financial world, and say, I have a better way for you to keep track of your digital agreements. That's the digital agreement process is something they've been engaged in for over a decade, depending on maybe 2 decades, depending who you talk to. The next one after that, I think, would be insurance, because insurance has more parties and they're not as used to digital agreements, but they're getting used to digital agreements very quickly because there's a lot of data that insurance companies want to process relative to their agreements. And then at the end of the spectrum, unfortunately, are agreements where there's many parties, like trade finance, where you have a lot of inefficiency because people are not used to using digital agreements. They're used to using paper. And there's also like 5 or 6 parties in every transaction. And so it's particularly difficult to clear both of those hurdles simultaneously.
And something like too many cooks spoil the broth. Got a lot of parties involved.
Yeah. There's a huge amount of inefficiency there, but it's just a question of getting these 5 or 6 parties to use basically the same system and not some other system.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're going to see the trends in technology. I've seen it a number of years in the work that I do, that people are reluctant to embrace even micrcomputers. I remember when they first came out, I actually taught at a bank, taught people how to use spreadsheets, Lotus 123 years ago, and they had one computer in the entire bank. This was a rather large bank. They eventually went for it and got it. But I think you are on the cutting edge. You're out there right now with the smart contracts and what's happening with it. And there's a lot of potential. If someone says, hey, I want to know more about this, I want to get to know more, of course, they can go to smartcontract.com. What else could they do and what should they know about this to be able to access your services and be able to find out more how they would implement it?
So our services are actually kind of specific. We cater to people who are relatively far along in their creation of a smart contract and want to connect it with key inputs and key outputs. I think the way that people, it really depends on the industry that you're in. It depends if, it really depends on the industry. It really does. Like if you're a smaller business, the way you're probably going to see this impact you is you're going to see smart contract insurance policies, smart contract financial products being offered to you. If you're a technology startup or a fintech or an insurtech, this is something that you could integrate into your own back office and your own back-end systems to make them work better. If you are at a big company, like an insurance company, a financial services or kind of securities related institution, a trade finance company, then this is very important for you, because it basically, the way I would think of it initially, I would think of it as like the internet of contracts, right? So it's the internet version of key agreement around your type of business.
Good way to put it.
And part of the reason that you don't have that today is because the internet maybe wasn't so set up to handle the security and the requirements of high value financial agreements to be run in a secure kind of tamper-proof manner. So in all likelihood, if you're a tech startup, in a part of the world that requires contracts to function well and effectively, so not a social application, not some kind of super duper consumer application for younger demographics. If you're a technology company that needs contracts to function well for your business to function, this is interesting. It really depends on how much you need digital agreements to be executed as written. The more you need that in your business, the more this is going to impact you sooner.
Yes, indeed. Very good words of wisdom, and a lot of good opportunities there for those that can embrace that and start working with you on that. Sergey Nazarov, thank you very much for being with us today. We appreciate your time and the information you shared with us.
Yeah, Terry, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And for those of you watching this, think about this. Go back over there. This is the kind of information that can give you a competitive advantage. Learning how to use this, particularly in the right areas, can give you and your firm the advantage over others. And nothing else, it's good to know what's there. Go on over to smartcontract.com, take a look at their site, see what's there, get some education on it. You'll be glad you did. And we look forward to hearing from you. Please leave a comment below, and we'll look forward to interfacing. If you have some questions, let us know as well. I'm Terry Brock with terrybrock.com and Business Journals. Looking forward to hearing from you.